Hello my friends, my name is Ben, and this is the first video in an MGN series called Destiny Enemies Explained, where I strip away the hitboxes and the other bare bones information about these enemy races, and we look at their history, their identity, and their characteristics. Now, straight off the bat, I'm going to make the guesstimate that you are a Destiny player. I think that's I think the odds of me being right are pretty high. Which means, if I am correct, that you already are acquainted with the enemy races in Destiny because you do a lot of shooting and they do a lot of dying. You probably understand that captains have shields, you understand that vandals might have sniper rifles every now and again, and I think you're probably best buddies with a few Gregs the Dregs. So, depending on if you've played Destiny 1 and Destiny 2, there's going to be probably varying amounts of information that you lot know about the Fallen. If you've played Destiny 1, you at least are probably aware that the Fallen were organized into houses. If you've only been playing in Destiny 2, there's a good chance you might not know that, so a lot of the information I'll be telling you comes from Destiny 1 specifically, especially when we're talking about the House of Devils. Now, since this is the first video in this series, I'm going to be covering a lot of broader information when it comes to the Fallen, and this is going to be shared across the majority of the Fallen houses. Right, let's begin. So, similar to us, the Fallen, or the Elixni, which is their actual name, they were given a golden age by the Traveler. And again, similar to us, the Fallen suffered a collapse. Now, if you're interested, just a cheeky bonus info, the lore implies that this collapse was actually carried out by Oryx, the Hive King. Regardless, the majority of the Fallen were destroyed, and this event was called the Whirlwind. So, if you ever hear somebody mentioning an event called the Whirlwind, just consider that their collapse. So, this is where the Fallen get their name from, because they were originally pretty powerful. They were a spacefaring race. There's a good chance they had a lot of colonies similar to us, but at the end of the day, they were scattered across the galaxy, and they've ended up in our solar system as scavengers and ship stealers, which is a pretty large fall from grace, so that's why they're called the Fallen. However, one of the few pieces of their culture that would actually survive this whirlwind was their society's class and hierarchy system, and this split all the Fallen at the same time into different houses. So during the whirlwind, some of the houses, like House Stone, were eradicated, and other houses, like House Scar especially, is rumored to be destroyed by the fallen mercenary Taniks. Again, that's why you never see anybody from House Scar walking around. The houses, however, that did actually manage to make it to our solar system and stay there for the longest amount of time were the House of Kings, Devils, Wolves, Winter, and Exile. Okay, now if you play Destiny 1, you understand that you can identify a fallen enemy's house by the colors that they're wearing. Now, you can kind of still do this in Destiny 2 due to recent events in Beyond Light. Currently, there are only two houses that stand against humanity. This would be the House of Dusk, they wear purple, and the House of Salvation, they wear white. Alright, now that's out of the way, I can properly examine the first house of this series. Let's begin with the origins and the identity of the House of Devils. As previously mentioned, the House of Devils, they were either already a house before the Fallen had the Whirlwind or their collapse, or they were formed after, just by survivors of this catastrophe. The House of Devils, similar to the House of Kings, they would set up their home on Earth. The Fallen of the House of Devils, they wear red, and similar to the majority of the other houses, they actually follow the traditions of, like I mentioned, their class and hierarchy system. And this involved the Fallen being divided into several castes or classes, and this introduces the substance known as ether. So, what is ether? I was trying to think of like a comparison to it to like food or water or air. It's kind of like food, I guess, but they have to have it or they die. Like, my guess is, because since the Fallen have teeth, I'm assuming that, they can eat food, and they usually consume ether through tubes, like in their necks or whatever, I don't know. But at the same time, if they had like all the food in the world but no ether, they would shrink and die. If a Fallen has that really healthy amount of ether, they grow exponentially to really large sizes. So when you're playing Destiny and you see the Fallen, the larger ones, they get a lot of ether, and the smaller ones get barely any ether. but at the end of the day, they all have to have some amount of ether in order to survive. Okay, so with that in mind, you can understand why the fallen houses, they would distribute ether in equal amounts in order to separate the fallen into specific classes. So we're going to start at the bottom. Dregs are at the bottom. If you play Destiny, you probably already recognize that dregs happen to be the smallest fallen you face. So again, they get the meager ration of ether, the smallest amount, and at the same time they actually have their lower arms cut off. And now this isn't so bad, I'm sure it's painful, but it's not so bad because the fallen can actually regenerate limbs. But at the same time, dregs have docking caps placed on their stumps, and this prevents the limbs from actually coming back. This is done for two reasons. The first being like the distribution of ether for the dregs, the meager amount. This prevents them from growing to larger sizes, again stopping them from being a physical threat to their superiors, and the act of having their bottom arms cut off, this is an act of humiliation that kind of makes sure and reinforces that they understand their place in the society as being at the bottom of the barrel. They know that they are dregs. So Vandals are the next up, and they have all four arms intact, and they do have a larger ration of ether. Like I mentioned at the very start of this video, they tend to wield wire sniper rifles and occasionally shrapnel launchers. If they are using sniper rifles, they will hang back during fights and they will pick off their opponents from far. They can be really annoying, especially when you're doing higher level content. Now, the highest ranking fallen that you will commonly face are the captains. Captains have greater ether rations than Vandals. They have, I'd say, stronger armor, they have the cool cloaks, and oftentimes they do choose to use arc-enhanced swords instead of guns in order to fight in close quarters combat, but apart from that, they will also use shrapnel launchers occasionally. So those are the common fallen or Elixni enemies that you will face, and you would have faced from the House of Devils. That being said, the House of Devils hierarchy, like the other traditional houses, they did have ranks that ascended beyond just the guys that you fight, but because there are so few of these numbers, a lot of times only maybe one of the higher ranks, you will rarely ever see them. So up above the captain that we are aware of, the next rank is Archon, and the Archon is considered to be the religious leader of a fallen house. So these guys, they are the ones who traditionally help distribute the ether amongst the members of the house, and they're also the ones who communicate with the house's prime servitor. And the prime servitor, you already know, you know what servitors are, but the prime servitor is the big boy, and he is the main creator of the ether. There's usually only one Archon per house, and I'm saying this because I did a lot of research, and I've not ever found an instance where there's more than one Archon at a time. There could be, but we've only ever seen there being one Archon at a time in a house. So like I said, if there's only one Archon per house, for an Archon to die, it's a terrible loss for a house to suffer, and again, that is why you will rarely ever see them in the open. Archons, they would tend to have the second largest ether rations, and this is second only to the Kel. And as I mentioned before, they are seen as religious leaders, and so they have more of a priest role than a warrior role. Finally, at the top of the ladder, top of the food chain, you got the Kel, and the Kel is the leader of this house. The Kel takes pretty much as much ether as they want, so presumably they are the largest fallen that you would ever face, and they are the sole rulers of all fallen in their house. It is also, fun fact, a tradition that whoever kills the Kel of a house, without question they are assumed the new rightful Kel, and this extends to species other than the Elixni. So, again, if a human kills a Kel, they are the Kel. Right, so that is really basic information, even though it is more than you understand about the Fallen, and everything I've said to you now, that actually extends to most of the other houses. So in my other videos, I might make reference of what I've said here, but this is going to be the only article or video where I spend this much time talking about this. So now we can actually look at the motivations and I guess the personality of the House of Devils. So the Fallen in general, they have a reputation for being ship stealers, scavengers, pirates, you get it. And the House of Devils really embody this kind of personality. Like I said, their home is on Earth, and this would be situated in the ruins of our Golden Age, so in ruined cities, ruined buildings, everything like that. And they tear apart technology, human technology, and they reverse engineer it, and they do whatever they can with whatever they can get their hands on. In terms of motivations, what's the bigger goal for this house? There was actually a time when all but one of the fallen houses, they actually shared the same goal, and again, the House of Devils shared this goal. So like I mentioned at the very start, the Elixni had their own golden age, and this was given to them by the Traveler. However, when the collapse happened, or their collapse happened, or the whirlwind, the Traveler ditched them, and the survivors followed the Traveler here. So I think it's safe to say that the Elixni were the ones that got a golden age before us. So the kind of broader goal at the time, back then, was they believed if they could retake the Traveler, they could force it to give them back a golden age. But the problem with that is that the Traveler is sitting above the last human civilization. And as a result of this belief, the Fallen became automatic enemies of humanity, and they oftentimes prove themselves to be a threat to the very existence of humanity, so we were always enemies, and we were always bound to be enemies. Twice, there have been 2 times, when the Fallen tried to take the city, and the House of Devils were there both times. Now, the first time, and not too much is known about this, unfortunately, I tried to do some digging, but I couldn't get too much. The first time was the Battle of Six Fronts. The Battle of Six Fronts was the first major battle the city ever fought. It was right after the 4 Titan Orders created the first walls around the city, and a coordinated attack by the Fallen hit the walls. Now again, there's no specific mention of exactly which fallen houses were there, but since the House of Devils are considered to be the closest to the city, it only makes sense that the House of Devils were there at Battle 6 Fronts. It was a really tough battle, and it took the combined strength of several Titan Orders, a lot of Guardians, Osiris himself, Saint 14, the Iron Lords, the Sunbreak. Actually, the Sunbreakers might have been Twilight Gap, but you get what I'm saying. A lot of big names had to be there to hold them off, but they did hold them off. However, even though they were defeated, the Fallen and the House of Devils were not broken. The second battle, this is the big boy. I would say up until the Red War, which was, the very start of Destiny 2, with the Red Legion taking the city, the Battle of Twilight Gap was probably the largest battle ever fought by the city. And I would actually still argue that it is the largest battle, since with the Cabal and the Red Legion, they had an unfair advantage by taking away the Guardians' light. However, in the Battle of Twilight Gap, even though the Guardians had the light for the entirety of the battle, they still nearly lost. So, take that as you will. So the Battle of Twilight Gap, what exactly happened here? This would be the one time when all the fallen houses put aside their differences and they united. I'm going to talk about this probably when I reach the House of Kings in a later video, but there's a lot of speculation in the theory that the House of Kings actually secretly controlled the House of Devils, but that's neither here nor there. But regardless, the House of Devils, they actually sent out a call to all the houses that were spread across the solar system. They called to the House of Kings on Earth, they called to the House of Winter on Venus, and they called to the House of Wolves in the far reaches of the reef. And for the first time, everyone answered and everyone made their way to Earth. I can't remember exactly how long the battle lasted, if it was for a day or multiple, but at the end of it, thousands of fallen, guardians, and just normal people died. And despite the overwhelming sacrifices that guardians had to make, the Fallen did actually breach the walls and the defenses surrounding the city, and they did get inside and just started killing everything. And it was only because of Lord Shaxx disobeying his superior, Lord Saladin. He was ordered not to leave his post on the edge of the city, and he disobeyed that when he saw the Fallen entering the city and abandoned his post and went inside, and he was able to stop the Fallen from causing any more damage inside the city. And if it wasn't for that, there's a very good chance that the battle would have been lost. However, regardless of everything Lord Shaxx did and all the others did, it didn't really matter, because if the Awoken Queen didn't do what she did, the Battle of Twilight Gap almost certainly would have been lost. Like I mentioned, the House of Wolves were situated in the Reef, and they were constantly at war with the Awoken. And so when they stopped and made their way to Earth, the Queen of the Awoken saw this, she knew what this meant, and so she took up her fleet and she ambushed the Wolf Armada, single-handedly slaying the Kell of the House of Wolves. And as a result of this, for a time, she ended up being the Kell of the House of Wolves herself, and she ended up ruling the House of Wolves for a time. But again, if the House of Wolves had actually reached Earth and joined with the House of Devils and the other houses, there would most likely be no humanity as of now. Okay, so even after the Battle of Twilight Gap, when all the Fallen were defeated, still the House of Devils were not broken. They simply licked their wounds and retreated and prepared, continued their scouting missions and their looting missions and their attacks against the city and whatnot. However, this brings us to the events which ultimately led to the fall of the House of Devils. And the very first major blow against the House of Devils was the death of their Kell Sulcus. So Sulcus led the Devils in the Battle of Twilight Gap. He ended up surviving it. He was okay, he got out. However, Saint 14, a Titan, an Exo-Titan, if you play Destiny 2, you've probably seen him. He was the Titan Vanguard at the time, and he considered himself to be the son of the Speaker. Again, if you've played Destiny 2, and especially after they got rid of the Red War, you wouldn't know who the Speaker is. He was considered like the leader, I guess, of the city. And he considered Saint 14 his son. And he came to Saint 14 and he gave him a very specific mission, which was to break the House of Devils, and this of course involved finding the Kell and killing him. So Saint 14 made it his mission to hunt down Sulcus, and eventually he found him and 1v1'd him. Now for a time it seemed like Sulcus would win. He had the superior strength, and of course Saint 14 specifically states that he was no ordinary Fallen, which means he must have been very good at combat. However, with the last of his strength, the Titan would headbutt Sulcus, and the power of this strike would break his skull and kill him. So like I said, the death of Sulcus, the Kell, made Saint 14 the rightful Kell and ruler of the House of Devils. And technically, if he wanted, he could have walked up to the House of Devils and taken control of them, and that would have been the entire House of Devils done. However, the Titan would receive news that the Warlock Osiris had been spotted on Mercury, and so from that day onwards until a few seasons ago, Saint 14 would disappear. And this, although it left the Fallen House leaderless, they would still make do with what they had. And eventually, their Archon, like I said, the religious leader, Rixus, he would take up the mantle of leadership. Him and the Prime Servitor, Sepix. The Archon and the Prime Servitor would often work hand in hand. So Rixus, the Archon of the House of Devils, he would lead the House of Devils for many years. I've seen some sources say this for hundreds of years. I cannot 100% confirm that, so I'm just going to say it was for a long time. However, the Guardian, or you, the player character, if you played Destiny 1, you actually killed this guy in like the second story mission when you were searching the Cosmodrome for ship parts in the Cosmodrome. Yeah, so you killed the Archon literally like on your first day of work. Pretty impressive. So with the Archon dead, naturally, Sepix Prime, the next guy in charge, he was hunted down in the Devil's Lair strike. Again, the Cosmodrome strike, which we are getting next season, I believe. And when we killed Sepix Prime, this utterly crippled the House of Devils because this actually really hurt their ability to create ether. And from that moment on, the House of Devils just wouldn't be a significant threat to the last city. And that was until Siva was found. So, if you've played Destiny 1, you know what Siva is. If you've played Destiny 2 only, you would have no idea, really. What's Siva? To break it down pretty simply, Siva was nanite technology used by humanity during the Golden Age. And the nanites would quickly replicate and create cities on colony worlds like Mercury, Venus, Mars, you get it. However, after the collapse, it disappeared, and nobody really knew where it was located or stored, and that was until the House of Devils found it, and they unleashed it upon the region known as the Plaguelands. I gotta stress, I'm not going to give too much information about this time period because I almost feel like the House of Devils changed so drastically in their identity that you could almost argue this wasn't the House of Devils anymore. And the reason I say this is, when the House of Devils found Siva, They integrated it into their bodies, and instead of being devils, they became devil splicers. They were led by Axis, who gave himself the title of Archon Prime, which is very interesting because, as you see, like I said, there are Archons and then there were the Prime Servitors, and these two worked hand in hand. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but the Fallen culture worshipped machines, and this is all based around their interactions with the Traveler back in the day. And so what Axis did was he used Siva to turn himself into a machine, and so he was the leader of the House of Devils technically, and he was worshipped as a god. And all the Fallen, their goal was to become like him and become like gods by being machines. So as you can see, it's pretty different from even the Fallen you're fighting today. It's very, very, very different. Of course, if you've played Rise of Iron back in Destiny 1, you understand that we did defeat the Fallen, killing Axis and his general Vozic, the Archpriest. And with the defeat of Vozic and Axis, the Devil Splicers pretty much fell apart, and that was it. That was basically it for the House of Devils. They ceased to exist completely. Hunters on scouting missions they would find in devil hideouts and other locations where they kind of knew the devils liked to chill. They found them completely abandoned, and they found piles and heaps of House of Devils banners in burning piles, which really was significant. This was the Fallen in the House of Devils saying, "This house is no more, we're done." So, what happened to the survivors of the House of Devils? They went to one of two places. The first place was the House of Dusk. We'll get into that in a different video. The second was the House of Kings, which was located on Mars. However, one ship stealer from the House of Devils would create her own house, and she would seek her people's salvation in the darkest parts of our system. If you've played Beyond Light, you have a pretty good guess what I'm on about. Yeah, so I did some research on this, but most of it was from my memory. If you want to learn more about the House of Devils or the Fallen in general, I would recommend you go to ishtarcollective.net. Every single lore page, every lore piece from Destiny 1 and Destiny 2 is located there. All you have to do is type in the desired topic and you will find everything that was possibly created about it. Of course, if you want to wait or you like the sound of my voice, I will be doing videos like this for the other Fallen houses and eventually the other races in Destiny as well. If you are interested in the lore in general, you can find my YouTube channel. It's called Venextron, and I'll be doing a lot more there in the near future. Until then, thank you for checking out MGN. Like I said, my name is Ben, and it was a pleasure to help you out. Bye bye.